If you know what this or this means when performed towards a door, you're officially smarter than a professor. The Doors books are not a typical series. There are 3 altogether in the first series: Colony, Twilight, and Fields of Blood. And they all take place at the same time, but also don't. You see, they are essentially a series of parallel universes, wherein the same group of characters go on a different adventure depending on which door they go through, with this moment being the point of convergence that begets different outcomes or universes. You don't have to read them in any particular order. In fact, you don't need to read all of them, because they all start exactly the same. A group of cliches are called together by millionaire Walter Van Dam, whose daughter Annalena has gone missing in a mysterious network of caves. In these caves, they find a series of doors, each marked with a different symbol, and must decide which one to search behind for the missing girl. In Colony, they go behind the door marked with a question mark, as seen on the front cover here, and end up going back in time to 1944, except it's not 1944 as they know it, but an alternate version. And here details may get a little bit slippery, because I am not an expert in World War II. From the blurb, Nazi Germany capitulated early. The US has taken control of Europe and is threatening the Russian-led resistance with a nuclear strike. In short, the USA has finally followed in England's footsteps by just taking over. The Russians are being stubborn, and due to the Stauffenberg assassination succeeding, a double-testicled Hitler is dead.
Take that, Hitler!
But is Annalena behind this door? And if so, will they be able to find her? Now, I found out through reading some German material that this was apparently meant to be a TV show, maybe, but has obviously been made into a book series instead. I don't know how this would have worked as a TV show, as that would involve the same set of 6 characters going on 3 independent journeys which do not affect the others. But a show about caves in Germany with doors that send you to different times in history with alternate dimensions sounds like it could actually be a pretty good as long as you concentrate. I also found out that there is a second series of these out, but they seem to follow completely different characters, so I don't know what's going on there. But I'll get into that in more detail later. Finally, I'd like to point out that this book was originally written in German and translated into English, so some issues I had with the writing may be a translation issue, but having read some of the German reviews of it, maybe not. So the reason I picked up this book was because it was talking about caves, and I love caves. I like being nestled in the bosom of the earth, in the cold and damp and dark, for only there does my own dark soul seem bright. There were some pretty cool ideas thrown in. For example, when they get to the door chamber, the gravity just goes all upside downy. I also thought the idea of an alternate history was pretty cool, especially in conjunction with such a famous time period. I liked the setup of a group of just random people who would never normally meet being thrown together. And there are some good moments with tension building when they find, for example, some dead bodies in the caves before they get to the doors, and one of the dead people literally dies in front of them, so obviously he'd just been attacked. So you're kind of wondering, oh, who's down here killing peeps? Where are they now? Are they going to kill these guys? So it does raise some good questions and tensions in the first 90 pages. And honestly, I just think the idea of having 3 different timelines with the 3 books is really quite cool. I don't think it was performed perfectly, from what I've seen, but it's a neat idea. And, I mean, caves. So as I said before, some of these may be down to the translation, as the book was originally in German, so bear that in mind. Firstly, it was overwritten. The prose was very difficult to follow because it's too wordy and artificially inflated with pointless or repeated information. I don't need to know how much horsepower this bloke's Lamborghini has. And you don't need to specify someone's Rolls Royce was a black badge Wraith, but then never say that it was a Rolls Royce and just assume the person knows what a black badge Wraith is. But I didn't. I thought it was a karate ghost, so I was very confused for a while. And there were a lot of instances of the same information being told to different characters at different times. And I get logically, perhaps that would happen, but it's also a book you've written for someone to read. The reader does not need to hear it 3 times. You can skip the scenes where it's repeated. There's also far too much military talk. And I know, yeah, the book did say it was about World War II on the blurb, though to be honest, I think I blacked out when I read that bit because I completely forgot it was going back in time to World War II. All I remembered was the caves. Tunnel vision, I think. But it's still too much. You'd have to be quite clued up on military history and World War II to understand some bits of it. And I am not. My history education was appalling. I learnt more from these 6 idiots and their master than I did from any history teacher. And I've read war books before. That's how I know I don't care for them. But I've never felt out of depth with any of them because the author remembers that the reader is not an expert and gives them necessary details for them to understand what's going on. Granted, usually they're about like the foot soldiers who aren't privy to a lot of the intel, but still. This is clearly more influenced by war films, like Inglourious Basterds was mentioned. I don't watch war films, so I didn't get most of the references to war films. That might have also been an effect, because war films are generally more guns and action rather than the emotional side, which the war books tend to focus on. But it's especially irritating in this when historical moments are mentioned, which, like, the characters have a laugh at. Like, there's some joke that I've not been made privy to, and that makes me sad. Like I'm missing something. What's so funny about submarines landing in Argentina? I don't understand why that's funny, but then why did you then explain in detail about Hiroshima and Nagasaki? I think I said those wrong, but okay. Yeah, well, whatever. I'm not doing it again. Funnily enough, I learned about the nuclear bombs. I didn't learn about some random German U-boats in Argentina. So why did you not explain that joke to me? I got very annoyed at that. Leading on from this, it was actually very difficult to tell what was going on sometimes because scenes aren't described particularly well. I struggled following some of the action scenes, especially in the caves, which ticked me off because that was the whole reason I picked up the book, with these caves, and then I couldn't actually picture the caves or understand how they were moving through the caves. Some of the logistics seemed a bit off, like can you really conceal a G36 rifle beneath a coat? Considering this happened in 1944 in a newly liberated Leipzig, crawling with soldiers who could probably tell when you're trying to conceal a rifle and are already suspicious of you. And there are some inconsistencies, like someone's nose stud turns into a ring for a short while, which is a little thing, but it really should have been spotted because the words in German are very different. So it's not a translation thing. The characters are really quite boring. Professions aside, they're all cliches. 2 of them, Victor and Dana, are free climbers and cave explorers. They're the cave people. Not actual cave people. But they both clearly have military history, so of course they're the smartest, who have the best lines and the best scenes, are in charge and make complicated military hand gestures that of course the other thickos aren't military brained enough to understand. The military lady Dana is super cool and beats up guys without spilling her coffee, and is really stubborn and grumpy because everyone knows women who serve in the army can't have fun. Then the fat, pervy guy, Spranger, is useless and only good for making bad one-liners. And, I mean, yeah, he saves him at one point by pretending to be drunk. And he, of course, has no skills. Ingo, the parapsychologist, or ghost doctor as I prefer to call him, is just the other one, really. He hasn't got much of a personality or skill set, and is generally just kind of nice. Professor Friedman, the geologist, is stuck up and makes fun of everyone and isn't very good at using the spelunking equipment, and he has a notebook full of scribblings he's very protective over. And finally we have Coco, the clairvoyant. She is the one specifically referred to as a cliché. Which she is, but not the right one. She is a clairvoyant or medium, and is constantly described as being the epitome of that cliché. When you think of a stereotypical clairvoyant, what do you think of? Probably something like this. But she's more like this. Aside from the characters being cardboard cutouts, we don't learn anything real about them. I don't know what they like or dislike. I don't know their goals or hobbies or dreams or nightmares. I don't know about their family or friends, or what they want to spend the reward money on Van Damme has offered them. I don't know what they'd lay their lives down for, and what they wouldn't. I have no reason to care about them in the slightest. And this wasn't helped by the book's constant head hopping. Now, head hopping is one of those techniques that is technically neutral, but quite old-fashioned and doesn't come up much in modern fiction, so most people don't really care for it these days. But in this, it's actually detrimental to the book because it both stops us from getting close to the characters, so we don't form any connections, but also stops any tension or mystery about the characters' pasts being allowed to build. Their secrets are just revealed in their narration without any other character being privy to it or wondering about it. They just sort of tell the reader, which leaves no impact. Or they specifically don't, but constantly tease about it, which comes across as sort of weird. A character will be thinking about their past in vague, broad strokes, which tells us nothing, and it isn't how people think. We don't even get the impression that they're trying to stop themselves from thinking about it because it's too painful. It's just they stop to leave the mystery there, but I literally don't care, so it's just annoying. The tension is also reduced in another way. Remember how the whole plot is that they're looking for Annalena, the missing daughter? We follow her as well. We know exactly what she's doing, where she is, and if she's still alive or not. We all know that, so there's no mystery about whether or not she's okay. So all that potential tension and mystery, which should have been so easy to feed with little drips and hints of where she had been and where she could be going, and never knowing if she's actually alive. And to be fair, her scenes had absolutely no point in being there. There's nothing we learn that isn't repeated in another scene. So really, cutting her out would have just been one less person to repeat information to. So I don't know why we followed her at all. She should have just been in the prologue. Oh yes, this book is sandwiched with a prologue and an epilogue, both of which are far too long and filled with pointless details, which make them boring and also kind of confusing. I'm pretty neutral on prologues and epilogues, but if you're going to include them, you need to keep them short and snappy. They should make you want to read more, not throw so much information at you without character or context that you're too overloaded to even think about continuing. There's quite a lot to unpack here, so I'll start with the briefest of summaries. So the USA plans to take over Europe now that Germany has surrendered, but Russia fights back because Stalin's communists don't want capitalist America to rain on their parade. For some reason, Britain are helping the USA because the US will give them a cushy admin job, which in Britain's eyes will restore the empire. I think. To be honest, a lot of political stuff went over my head. I'm going to call rubbish on this straight away because, talking as a Brit, that wouldn't happen. There is no way the English would help America take over Europe. We're far more likely to just do it ourselves. But okay, I'll deal. The Americans find out that the Germans have been working on some super bombs, like missiles that can travel unmanned 5,000 miles. And the USA plans to use these to send nuclear bombs to both Japan and Russia, killing millions. But if the Germans had this tech, why didn't they use it? If they knew they could attack America, why did they surrender? And the Germans didn't have this power in history from what I can tell. They developed the V2 in 1944, the same year this is set, which was designed to be launched up into space and then fall on the unsuspecting British, which they did do to many casualties. And that can go about 200 miles. I mean, I was under the impression that this was an alternate history based on changing one historical fact, the assassination of Hitler in 1944, which makes sense considering part of the history of the magical doors in this involves an Illuminati-type group going back to change significant moments in history to suit their own agenda. So why did the Germans suddenly have these amazing missiles? But anyway, Annalena finds out and wants to stay to help the communists stop the nuclear strike by taking over an American base, but then it all goes wrong, and only Victor, the military guy, makes it out alive. Yet all the main characters, including Annalena, die. Which was shocking, I suppose, if also sort of flat, because I didn't care about any of them, so Not only is it disappointing because you felt nothing when the characters died, but also made the other bits sort of pointless. Like, find out that none of the crew are who they say they are. They've all lied to Van Damme in some way. The professor is an imposter, and the real professor never turned up at all. Although this is revealed shortly before or after the fake professor died, and then isn't brought up again until the very end, so it kind of felt like pointless information for most of the book. Spranger, the fat pervy one, pretends to be a bodyguard, but actually isn't. He reveals this to only the reader, and then dies. So that has no impact on anything. The ghost doctor had faked the clairvoyant certificate of genuine psychicness because they were sleeping together. that doesn't seem to affect him very much. And then Coco, the psychic, gets legit psychic powers anyway, so yeah. And the two military people don't want to admit to anyone they've been in the military, even though it's very obvious. Victor realises he recognises Dana from some operation in Darfur, but they never really say what the operation was. I think they were on opposite sides, but that's all we're told. And that's literally all the information we're given about it. So that felt like another pointless backstory that didn't go anywhere and told us nothing about the characters and had no impact on anything. And also, Van Damme is a millionaire. He's offered them all €1,000,000 for this job. But his background check was so weak he didn't pick up on any of these fake documents. Are you being serious? Some more questions in this are raised than are answered. There's this predator thing that turns up at the beginning and the end to no explanation. One of the guys from the previous rescue attempt team turns up, having been in the caves all along, but apparently didn't bother leaving until Victor turned up at the end. And then there's this, vampire guy who also just sort of turns up and eats someone in the present day. And can't go out in the sun. Why can't he go out in the sun? What, is he even human? Was he created? Was he born? Where did he go at the end? He just sort of disappears. Why was Annalena in the caves in the first place when she clearly wasn't dressed to go spelunking? The book tells us that she was curious about the magical doors because of stories her grandma told her, despite the grandma also disliking what the granddad did in the cave, so why would she even tell her granddaughter? Why would she go down there in an evening dress? What forced her to go there? Too much is left unanswered, and I don't know that the second lot of books, the second series, would actually answer any of these, because from what I can tell, the sequel series follows different characters and different doors, and even if these questions do come up in the background, I don't know what the other two books in this first series end with or establish, so I don't know if the information in the second series is going to make sense with all the first series information. Do all the first series of books end in the same way? If so, why would I bother reading the others? I know they're all going to die. If not, how could the sequel series possibly navigate 3 different endings? I suppose at the very least the Van Damme sections have to be exactly the same across all 3 books, including his encounters with the vampire dude and the Illuminati wannabes. But what if Victor isn't the only survivor in the other versions? This one ended with the clear implication that they're going to go after the Illuminati, but if there are different survivors, how can you possibly navigate that? And I know you're just gonna read it, I guess, but I don't want to have to read 3 universes knowing that technically 2 don't really happen. It's just too complicated, and if this author can't even keep a character's jewellery consistent, I don't trust him to juggle all these different timelines and universes in a neat and satisfying manner. I didn't enjoy this book. Not just because it's not my genre, which it isn't. I was fooled by talk of magic doors and caves and wound up with a complicated military book. But it just didn't have enough human connection for me to really care. Someone referred to this as being like a first-person shooter game, and I think that is an apt description, though I think they meant it positively, and I don't. It's just action and shooting and guns and missions without any of the stuff that makes a book good. The plot is convoluted, the world-building is all over the place, the characters are dull, the tension non-existent, and it was rife with needless details, gory deaths, and boring discussion. Maybe I would have been kinder to the other books in this series. In one they end up in some future, like a bad future, and in another they are transported back to the Middle Ages. But then again, maybe I wouldn't. I guess that's just a parallel universe that will never exist. That's all I have to say. Goodbye.